once you have that entrepreneurial bug, it's really hard to shake it.
Our featured speaker today is CEO and founder of Key Caliber, a proactive cybersecurity optimization platform that empowers organizations to make smarter, faster security decisions by catching the gaps in their security coverage before attackers do. Roselle, it's a great pleasure to have you as our featured guest today. Thanks so much for being willing to share your journey with us.
Thanks so much for the invite.
Of course. So I was looking at your background a little bit, obviously, Key Caliber, but it looks like you kind of have a storied background, just looking through your LinkedIn and some other assets. Seeing your storied background in technology, cybersecurity, entrepreneurship. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how you decided to be an entrepreneur and kind of what that path led you to and how you decided upon becoming an entrepreneur?
It's been a very circuitous path. I studied civil engineering when I was at Princeton. I did that for only 1 year after college. And after that, I joined a tech company. I was living in San Francisco. It was during the dot-com boom and seemed interesting. And that one had 6 rounds of layoffs, and I managed to keep my job through all 6 rounds. But it was definitely a roller coaster ride. And after that, I decided, well, I want to do a .com. And that never really got off the ground. But, and this was, over 20 years ago, there just wasn't the same infrastructure for founders, for entrepreneurs who weren't kind of already in the know. And I was definitely not already in the know. And so that never got off the ground, although technically I did sell it. It gave me the entrepreneurial bug. And as I'm sure you know, and all your guests know, once you have that entrepreneurial bug, it's really hard to shake it. So I had that started very early in my career. Then I saw a posting for a job that looked fascinating as a computer crime investigator at a law firm. And I had no experience in that field at all, but the job sounded really cool. And so I applied and convinced the hiring manager, hey, I've got an engineering degree from Princeton. I'll learn how to do it on the job. And that worked. So then I started doing computer forensics and internet investigations. It was really a fun job. And so once I started doing computer forensics, and that kind of set me on a path, because you can go down a couple different paths with computer forensics. I was working on civil cases at the law firm. Another potential road is law enforcement. And then the third is cybersecurity. I really liked the computer forensics because it was detective work on a computer. It was just really fun, especially when you find the quote unquote smoking gun. I really enjoyed doing that work. And this was so early in the industry that there just weren't that many people that had that skill set. So I earned this one certification that at the time, I think I was 600 something in the world to have that certification because it was just such a new field. So once I had that and I had that background and that skill set, then I found a bunch of other jobs doing forensics, worked at a government contractor, worked at Ernst & Young, and then eventually moved to the Department of Homeland Security, the division that was then called U.S. CERT, U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team. Now it's called the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. That was an amazing job because that organization's mission is to improve the security posture of government agencies and also critical infrastructure. So it just had the ability to see what was going on in so many different areas. And it was just a ton happening of information sharing. It was a very cool role. And then from there, I moved to the executive office of the president during the Obama administration. And there I was leading cybersecurity operations. So defending the network used by the White House and the rest of the agency. Fascinating job, super exciting, complete honor to be in that role. Super stressful. We was concerned that there would be a major breach and it would be in the news, and that did not happen under my watch, but it happened after I left. So it was a completely legitimate concern. And then from there, I had all these years of experience of being a practitioner in cybersecurity and seeing where there were technology gaps. And I decided, well, here's a gap. This needs to be filled. I'm going to fill it. And my first startup in cybersecurity that I founded was called Uplevel Security. And I led that for 2.5 years. Raised seed round, built an enterprise product. Eventually that was acquired by McAfee. And now I'm on my second cybersecurity startup, my third startup total. And this one has been an insane ride. Our incorporation date is March 12th, 2020. So, you started this you said April 2020. So, you know what was going on in the world at that time. Kind of a challenging time to start a company. And we've kind of ended up being this little company that has been tossed around by so many external events that have happened in the world that, we had no way to control, but, we had a major deal that was coming along nicely. And then, the war, broke out in Ukraine, and then that just fell apart. We were really close to getting fundraising. And then SVB collapsed, and that investor had a lot of ties to SVB. So we've just had our fair share of just getting the full roller coaster experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You've definitely had the roller coaster. I think to go back to the beginning of your story of you having a totally unrelated experience, and then you being like, this sounds like a super interesting role, and knowing that you can do it if you can convince the person, and then managing to convince them. I think that's so impressive. Just the level of success you've achieved is incredible. Really, really impressive. Thank you for taking us through your journey. Basically, I think that roller coaster of going from forensic cybersecurity role to working in the executive office to starting your own company, you've sort of experienced it in so many different industries in so many different ways, and it is such a young industry. How do you feel that it's changed across that period?
Oh my goodness, it's changed so much, and not necessarily for the better. Because when I started, it was kind of a backwater IT issue. Cybersecurity wasn't its own industry. And it's really grown into its own industry. And that's because 15 years ago, lots of money started pouring into it because it was seen, okay, there is money to be made here. And that has had its positive effects and its negative effects. And it's been positive in some ways because that has helped many good technologies to come to the fore and to be produced. And that is helping the defenders fight. And I'm very much a mission-driven founder. So when I think about what's going on in the industry, I'm always thinking about it from the perspective of what's actually helping the defenders in fighting the fight against cyber attackers. And so all of the money that's gone into it has definitely helped to create some good technologies. But on the flip side, what's ended up happening in many cases is that the companies with more money to spend on sales and marketing end up winning. And so it's not about superior technology. It's about superior sales and marketing. And that really does the industry a disservice, because then it's not the best technologies that are coming out ahead, and it's not the best technologies that all of the customers know about. It's the ones that have all these really splashy advertisements in all the airports, something like that, where they're getting their name out. And I've seen this happen time and time again where there are different product categories where the winners have not been the best technologies. And that makes it really hard for the defenders. They're not getting the right tools in their hand. And now there's so many different companies in this industry that it's just confusing to the buyer. And there's just a ton of noise. It's been great that the industry has matured and that there is so much attention on it now. Back when I started my first cybersecurity startup, I talked to a lot of large companies who would say, we're not going to spend money on cybersecurity until we're hacked, which is just such a backwards way of thinking of it and everything. But that was really the response I was getting. Now, I don't hear that the same way anymore. Although in the last year, definitely heard a lot of folks cutting budget seriously. It's usually not, we're going to get rid of our cybersecurity program. There's a much greater understanding of the need for cybersecurity, and resources are being put into cybersecurity. It's a challenging area for a startup and for a buyer, just because there are so many different facets to it. And sometimes the marketing language all starts to sound the same, even when the technologies are different.
That's a really interesting point, and something that kind of holds true, I think, in most kind of startups or, some technology companies is the one with the most marketing budget, flashy product ends up getting the because of that, right? The woo over the large clients usually ends up winning a bit there. So glad to hear that there's a lot of in the industry for better and somewhat for worse. First, I just want to say thank you for incorporating on my birthday. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate that. Secondly, I'd love to hear a little bit about your key caliber, right? As being a smaller company, how do you guys differentiate yourself or position yourself differently from a market perspective that helps to showcase the value that you have over those with larger marketing budgets or the flashier product or the airport signs? Like, how are you guys approaching that from a startup standpoint?
Yeah, so we are differentiated based on technology. We have some really unique capabilities. Without getting into too much of the nuance of cybersecurity and boring everybody, basically, when it comes to cybersecurity, there are a couple big components to it. You need to identify what you have, and then protect it, and then detect when something looks like it's bad, and then respond when something is bad, and recover from it. And that's the general gist of it. And traditionally, cybersecurity has been very focused on protect, detect, respond. That's far more glamorous. We're in that early stage of identify. And the reason why we're there is, again, this goes back to my mission-driven approach, is I very strongly believe you need to have a strong foundation of understanding what you have and what's most important, because then you can protect that well. If you don't have that, then you can add all these shiny products that protect and detect and respond, but you're not protecting everything because you don't even know what you have. So we are focused on identifying the full environment. And by that, I mean, all the workstations and servers and databases and everything that's in that organization's environment. But then we go a step further with it. And this is what's very differentiated about our technology, because other folks, they say, okay, here's everything that you have, and you've got a lot of work to do. And we say, okay, here's everything you have. And now here's this small subset that's actually super critical for your environment. And now that you know that, you can prioritize all your efforts based on that knowledge. So the security team goes from drowning to being very attuned to what needs to happen to improve their security posture, improve their risk posture, and they're aligned with what's most important to the organization. Cybersecurity has a bad rap sometimes of being kind of in its own little world, and security operations not being aligned with business operations. Depending on what type of companies you work at. If you work at a large company, I'm sure you've seen some security implementations that folks complain about because they're like, oh, this is a pain and it's impeding my work. We don't want to be the Department of No. That's never the way to do it. But there is a need to align security with the business so that security is acting in the best interest of the business and not just operating for security's sake. And so if you know what's most critical to the business, then you've got that alignment. And that's what we do that's very unique. And it's exciting technology. We love being able to talk about it. But I will say we're one of the little guys. I don't see us having any airport advertisements anytime soon.
I think that's super interesting. I really like that you're going through the process of identification as like the priority. I feel like you've pointed out a number of ways in which it's actually the best place to start. You don't want to be filling your team with a million extra tasks just because, you have computers that aren't used or unnecessary things to protect. I think that's really, really smart. I also think right now is a super interesting time, at least in the software development space, with AI. I have also heard about like two ways in which AI is sort of becoming a risk for cybersecurity. And I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts on this, whether these are based in reality or not. One is just like the general quality of code that's being written right now is maybe sometimes more questionable because so much of it is being written by AI. And then the other thing is I've heard, and this is on the fringe edges, I think, if anywhere, the idea of viruses that are actually using AI to try and prompt themselves to change to better penetrate systems. Is that a thing that actually exists, or is that just sort of something I've heard?
Both of those exist, and there are more problems even than just that. Generally speaking, AI-generated code is less secure. It also depends on which AI you're using. There are attempts at making the code more secure. That's one of the challenges building with AI. There are a ton of other challenges if you're creating AI models and you don't want them to be jailbroken so that they're producing results and spitting out information that they weren't supposed to spit out. That's a whole nother side of it. And then in terms of how attackers are using AI, yes, they're using it to iterate on malware, virus files. But they're using it far beyond that. So there was actually a report that came out very recently from Anthropic about how AI was used to launch attacks. I could spend a lot of time on this. I don't know how much you want to go into cybersecurity minutia, but it's fascinating and very worrisome at the same time because basically, to summarize it in very short order, it used to be that for an attacker to hack into a company, there would be a little bit of automation in the beginning to kind of figure out where there are holes. It's like, figuring out where are all of the doors to get to the building, and some of that could be automated. But then once the attacker got in the building, then I'm sort of using a physical analogy. Then a lot of it would be very manual for the attacker to, go to, say it's an office building, go to every door on every floor. Like that, doing that manually is a big effort. Now AI can just do it. And so the speed and the volume of attack is completely different. I will say it does have many folks in the cybersecurity community rather concerned about the new rate of attacks because we were having a hard time defending the pre-AI speed. So it does get very challenging.
Whether you're in cybersecurity or not, kind of seeing the rollout or advancement of AI at light speed, right? Can we keep up with it between governance, between technology, between just understanding how to leverage it or how it works? From an entrepreneur perspective, how do you keep up with what's coming out? What's new in the industry? What's changing rapidly, it sounds like, and how does that impact kind of your strategy and maneuverability with key caliber?
So we definitely incorporate elements of AI. It helps us to develop our technology, but I will say we do not just let it go run its course and just say, okay, now let's just drop in this code. It's more of an assistant than anything else. No AI generated code is making it into our product without a full analysis before. So it does augment. It certainly augments the team, which is fantastic. In that we're in the technology space, we're certainly using different types of AI for our technology. It's interesting how AI has many different flavors to it. There are different types of AI, but nowadays people think of generative AI, large language models, as the only type of AI. There are plenty of other types. Machine learning is a form of AI, and we've had that in our technology since day one. But a lot of folks now, they just think, well, is it going to generate this output that looks like you're talking to ChatGPT? Then it's AI. Otherwise, it's not. Used to create the technology is part of the technology. It's an important component to what we're doing. So cybersecurity it's a very unique industry in a way because we are always racing to keep up in two areas. So we're racing to keep up with the attackers. They're using the technology and they also don't have constraints the same way like businesses do. So that's one race that we're always a little bit behind with. But the other is with securing whatever technology has been developed. So, back in the early days of cybersecurity, it was defending the network, defending the endpoint. Then it's defending the cloud, then defending the IoT technologies, and now it's AI. And so there's always something that security is going to have to also defend. And we're always going to be behind the curve a little bit with that also because the technology has to be developed before there's a need to secure it. And generally speaking, when a new technology is being developed, especially when there's a race to develop it, as is the case with AI, then security is not really built in from the beginning. We want to just get this out and security. Yeah, maybe we'll add some of that later. But right now we're just trying to get functionality. So that, puts us as, the defenders like further behind with it because then we've got to try to figure out, all right, how are we going to secure this after the fact?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting how you said that it was like cybersecurity is a unique field. And I think that's very true in a lot of ways. I think there's like physical security is a comparable field in the sense of you have an adversary going straight at you. But cybersecurity, it feels like you're exposed to everyone, like you have adversaries everywhere in the world sort of thing. And so I think it has to be one of the hardest areas to remain on the cutting edge based on my understanding. Now, we do have a question from one of our listeners here, Giovanni. Do you want to ask your question, Giovanni?
Yes, please. I follow with interest about the conversation about cybersecurity, and I was wondering if it would be possible to delve into a bit the threats that can citizens have when they surf the World Wide Web, such as what could be good behaviors to avoid to be frauded during such type of activities in the internet. Thanks a lot.
I didn't catch that 100%.
Giovanni, you're asking what are the behaviors that private citizens can engage in to keep themselves safe online. Is that right?
Yes.
Good question. There's lots that can be done. So some of the primary ways that folks are become victims of cybersecurity attacks are around email. Number one is to be aware of what you're clicking on and not clicking on bad links or bad attachments. Now, how do you know if it's bad? Well, first of all, if it's from the sender you've never seen before and it looks a little weird, I would just skip that one. And if there is an email that's talking about some ridiculous urgency, and this goes for email and also text messages. There are cyber attacks that come in through text messages. Smishing attacks are sometimes called. And same concept where there's a link. It says, oh, your FedEx package. We tried to deliver it and we couldn't deliver it. Click here. It's a scam. Do not click on it. There's a lot that just requires being skeptical. If something sounds too good to be true, if you suddenly got this package, you didn't even buy anything, or there's suddenly these funds in your account. As a business owner, I get a lot of attempted cyber attacks. I don't fall for them, but attempts where the message will be something like funds are being deposited, or here's an invoice that needs to be addressed right away, like something financial with an attachment. If somebody's just really busy, they're going to say, oh shit, what is this? I need to just deal with this. Or, oh, it's funds. Let me, what's coming in. It's malicious. And once you click on a bad link or open a bad attachment, a malicious attachment, then you run the risk of there being malware in that then gets dropped onto your device. And so then that brings up my second point, which is having some type of, it used to be called antivirus. Now it's called endpoint detection and response, some technology for that. And there are lots of them. Some of them are open source. So that's another important one. For any computer, also many of them now give you the ability to use a personal firewall. So that allows you to just not get some of the traffic that's just sketchy traffic without you having to be able to distinguish it. It's just being done by the firewall. Having different passwords for each account. And I know that sounds like a headache, but if you use a password manager or have some system, it's feasible. But recycling passwords is a really, really bad idea. And the reason why is because what ends up happening, so when a company gets breached, and it's in the attackers, they're financially motivated. Some are not financially motivated, but for the ones that are, often they'll just, they'll get all of the logins that they can get, all the usernames and passwords that they can get. And then they'll post them on the dark web and sell them, sell them for, I don't know. I have no idea what the going rate is, like 50 cents per entry, or who knows, $1 per entry. So then they sell those lists. And then the attackers that bought those lists say, okay, now I'm going to try those logins on a bunch of other websites and see if it's the same. And that works a decent amount of the time because people are recycling their passwords. That's why it's so important to have a unique password for each account. So those are some of just the really fundamental basics for how to be safe online.
I think that's great advice, and it's absolutely true. And I'm over here in the corner laughing because I've certainly and still somewhat use the same password because it's easier to remember, and I know I should have a password key, and I know all these things, but I still don't. But this is great advice for anybody out there listening to change your passwords and make sure they're unique, or use a password key as well. I do know, at least from a cybersecurity standpoint, I think social engineering is one of the biggest areas of, I'll say, penetration, right? Just that aspect of human element, right? Someone making a mistake, someone clicking on a link can have a huge impact on cybersecurity, which is tough to manage towards. You honestly, in a lot of ways, can't, right? And so I think that's where your expertise comes in, it sounds like, to help at least somewhat safeguard people against that, which is amazing. I do want to shift a little bit here. I know we've talked about the cybersecurity industry, but really want to learn a little bit more your journey and kind of your experience just in entrepreneurship. So obviously you've had a storied career. You have 3 startups. You're on your third startup here. How do you balance everything between life, between family, between outside obligations as an entrepreneur who is trying to build and grow and scale their third venture here?
So for me, it's always about having your priorities straight. So, with my second and third startup, I've been a mother during this time. So actually, I started my second cybersecurity startup right after my baby was born, which was insane. I do not recommend that. For me, though, being a founder is fantastic. I take it very, very seriously. But my top priority is always being a mother. And so then that creates balance because I am always going to focus on my daughter's needs first, probably to my detriment. Often being a founder comes second, being a mom. I'll balance that way. But certainly I have my first priority is never wavered. I will say, I've been dealing with medical problem for the last few months, which has made me rethink that prioritization of being a founder as the second priority. And I've definitely switched that and now focus much more on my health. And I will say that it's hard for founders. It's having that balance, especially when you have other priorities outside of being a founder. It's very easy to let your own needs kind of fall by the wayside. It's the area that seems to have the most flexibility. My priorities in a certain way, but for other folks, maybe they're not parent, but they'll have something else that's a priority. Maybe it's an older family member or something like that. And so they'll make that second. And then their health will still be like far down the list. And so it becomes challenging to recognize the fact that you do still have to make sure that you're not neglecting yourself. I think a lot of founders do struggle with that. It's because it is kind of hard to have that balance sometimes. I'm looking at this from a whole new perspective due to the last few months and find it's super important to have some time in every day that's devoted to like what keeps you happy and healthy. And that really needs to be incorporated into the daily routine, like even if it requires blocking out that time on the calendar. It's literally like, okay, I've got this hour block or this 2-hour block. This is me time. If it has to be scheduled in, then schedule it in, but it needs to be a part of the daily routine. I do feel in some ways I've learned that the hard way.
I'm really sorry about the medical situation that you've been dealing with lately. But I think you are absolutely right. It's the area that entrepreneurs so often feel has the most flexibility. In some sense, the check comes due. Like you do have to deal with, if you're putting yourself through incredible exhaustion every day for years, like you're going to really seriously have to deal with that later on in life. And there's so many situations where entrepreneurs don't sufficiently prioritize their own health. And I think I appreciate you sort of sharing your perspective on that. Now, obviously, we are quite big advocates of community interaction and, entrepreneurial communities. I've noticed that on LinkedIn, you're a part of, I think it was Mindset Share and AI Link are 2 communities you're a part of. How have they sort of played into your personal and professional development? And what motivated you to pursue, connecting with other entrepreneurs through communities?
Yeah, well, so Mindshare is it's a community of founders, CEOs in the Washington, D.C. area where I am. And I've been a part of that since my last startup. And it's just a great community. I mean, a lot of it is around, I'm looking for an accounting firm who can help with such and such. And even having that type of assistance and insight is super valuable. It's just, the less you have to run around trying to figure something out, the more you can just ask a knowledgeable community, the easier it makes your workload. So that's great. In general, though, it's beyond that, and it is a very supportive community. And there are folks that are multi-site founders, and just when you look at the group collectively, they've seen it all because they've just had all those different experiences and that organization's around for a long time. So it's really, really helpful. And, there are other ways to define communities. I'm also part of communities that are focused on female founders. Realistically, we have a very different experience. There's just no way of comparing the experience of a female founder to a male founder. I mean, just look at the funding numbers. Female founders, 2% of venture capital. So our experience is going to be very different. Yes, it's 2%. It's not much.
Wow.
That shapes everything about the founder journey. So it's been very valuable to me to be part of those communities, both for receiving advice, but also I've really been a founder for multiple times now. I love being able to share my expertise as well. I really like that. I like the giving side of it. I've definitely learned lots of lessons the hard way. And if I can share that so that someone doesn't have to learn the hard way, that's great. So that's been really valuable as well, because finding folks that are going through it in a similar way, it helps with getting through it and seeing it from a different perspective, especially if someone has already had that experience and has some insight. Some founders, though, they have to learn everything the hard way. That's just how it is.
That's true.
Yeah. It's part of the founder mentality sometimes, for some folks is, you already know everything. But when you can be part of a community and get that shared knowledge base, it can be super valuable.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that's something that we all as founders here try to facilitate as well, right? Founders Voyage, we're trying to build community to share those lessons, right? And to your point, some founders need to learn them the hard way themselves. And it's sometimes just very hard to ask for support and advice, right? Sometimes it can be very isolating to be an entrepreneur and have that vision and drive yourself to that without having that community. So really love that you're advocating for that, because it does help the whole, entrepreneurship community. And especially as you mentioned with female founders, right? Usually they are not getting as much funding as male founders, right? And so that's an extra hurdle to go through. So being there to not only from your perspective of lending that advice, sharing that experience that you've had, but also being there as a support system and being able to lean in that when you need help is excellent. And I think everybody should be thinking through those things, like who's the community we have happen. So really love that part of engagement from your perspective and really helping to grow that community as well. So appreciate you sharing that. And something that, I think all entrepreneurs can learn from as well. As we kind of look into future state, right? I want to learn a little bit next for you, right? So as you're in your third startup here, what do you envision the future of your entrepreneurial journey looking like? Where do you end up seeing yourself in the future with your journey?
So, because of the medical issues I've been dealing with for the past few months, I'm actually stepping down from the CEO role. And so we'll still, of course, be very actively involved in the company, but I will be taking on a position that is less intense and requires fewer hours. I already have a new CEO and very excited to bring him in. Already see lots of exciting new opportunities as a result of having him on board. So this startup still has an interesting ride ahead of it. And there have been lots of twists and turns on its path over the last few years. And this year has been a little topsy-turvy for many industries, just because of the economic uncertainty. Eventually, I do see the company will most likely be acquired, because that's what happens with the vast majority of cybersecurity companies. There are very few pure play cybersecurity companies that go to IPO. It's a fascinating journey to get to that spot, for any company. We're still in the midst of it. And so it'll be really exciting to see what happens in the next 6, 9, 12 months, as this new situation for the company unfolds. And beyond that, I'm actually thinking of doing podcasts myself. So I'm going to have to talk to you guys after, because I've got some ideas around being a founder and around like other topics. And I will probably try to ping you for some suggestions as I get rolling with that.
Absolutely here to help. Just let us know.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say thank you very much for sharing that decision that you're making with us. I know that can be a sensitive time for a lot of founders, but I think it shows sort of, a lot of understanding of your reality and thinking about how the best path forward for you is to be willing to sort of carefully take that choice of finding a new CEO and moving into a position that you think more suits you for the moment. With the fact that you're already thinking about starting a podcast, I can already tell you've got the entrepreneurship vibe is still pushing you to do more. So I don't know if you can escape it fully.
You can't escape it from it.
Exactly. Now, we do like to wrap up with one particular question, and I thank you very much for going a little bit over time with us today. We like to ask what your words of wisdom or piece of advice would be that you want to leave us with today.
Oh, how much time do I have?
As much as you want.
So I would say certainly, we've talked about this a bit, but you can't neglect yourself. That's number one. You're at the helm and you're not functioning the way you need to be, then nothing can, within the company. And it's kind of the concept of, when you're on an airplane and you're given the instructions that if you have to put on an oxygen mask, you put your own on first. And that really needs to be the case for founders and their companies also. So that's one. I would say another big piece of advice that I've again learned the hard way is the team is so crucial. So crucial. With the right team, anything is possible. With the wrong team, everything's a struggle. And so it's really crucial, especially for those super early employees, to have folks that are just on the same page in terms of recognizing the uncertainty, embracing the uncertainty, recognizing that it's going to take an insane amount of work. It's not like your regular 9 to 5. And there are many folks that are just not really fit for working at a startup. They're more designed for just being in a big company where everything moves slowly and they can just mosey on along. So finding the people that have that drive and that intensity and that interest in being in a super fast-paced environment is really important. And I'd say, if I was to add a third, I'd say one of the most important traits for a founder is to be resilient, because there are just going to be so many times when you get punched in the gut that you're going to lose track of how many times it happens. And if you're the type of person where you get punched in the gut and you're doubled over and you can't get back up for a week or two, then entrepreneurship is not for you, because you need to be able to just take that punch, get back up on your feet and keep swinging. And again, it's not for everybody. There's a certain type of mentality to be able to withstand that. But I would say it's absolutely essential.
Very well said. I think, resiliency absolutely impactful to entrepreneurs, along with finding the right team and sharing absolutely can make or break that experience. So love that advice and definitely a unique perspective. So really appreciate you taking the time for that. We want to thank you overall today for just your thoughts and everything you shared with us. It's been wonderful. We also want to thank everybody who joined us today as we close out here. We appreciate bringing your perspective and energy to the discussion. Certainly Spencer and I and the team behind Founders Voyage feel very fortunate to be a part of the community with you and for the opportunity to bring this cooperative learning session on a weekly basis. So that being said, Roselle, if you are open to share contact information, any way someone can get a hold of you, they want to just reach out, not to put you on the spot, but if you're comfortable with that, we're happy to share. We can grab that from you at a later time if need be. But otherwise, I want to thank everybody again for putting forth the effort to join us today. And then if there's anyone that you as a community would like to nominate for a future session, we'd love to hear your nominations. And then if you'd like to support Founders Voyage podcast that Spencer's been working very hard to edit and get out, we can certainly help to facilitate that through our Patreon. But again, thanks everyone for joining. Roselle, it's been a pleasure. And thank you guys for joining us on this Saturday.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.